For the provincial government, this year started with a storm of complaints about snow clearing and sinkholes. Then came yesterday's news about plummeting support for the Muskrat Falls project, and that's on top of the monumental task of creating a budget that'll get this province back on track. No question, Premier Dwight Ball faces enormous challenges in 2017, and the Premier joins us now in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Anthony.
First question, this corporate research poll yesterday that indicates for the first time more Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are opposed to the project. What do you make of this?
Not at all surprised with the polling numbers on Muskrat Falls that came out yesterday. I think back in 2012, I would have anticipated that as we got further into the project, given where we are with schedule loss and cost and eventual impact on rates in our province, that people would not see this project like they saw it at sanctioning time. I guess there are lots of things that I would have to consider right now. My job now is to manage a project that I really didn't support in 2012, but realizing that we have significant money invested into this now and significant contracts in place for Muskrat Falls Power, and getting out of this, we would still be left with the costs and still left with having to find reliable power in the future.
Right. Now, you say you were against this project, but I did some research here, and I've got you quoted during the filibuster, you remember, back in December of 2012, and you said, quote, "The economic benefits that development could create, I think, is a good thing. The opportunities we'll have in Labrador as a result of this will be a good thing. Closing down Holyrood, as I said earlier tonight, will be a good thing. The fact that we've taken a different corridor around Quebec will be a good thing. This is the message that they need to hear, and it gives confidence to the people here in the province." That does not sound like somebody who was against this right from the beginning.
Well, I had lots of questions around Muskrat Falls being solely on the backs of ratepayers in the province. When I mentioned those projects, I was talking about mining in Lab West as an option of getting. If you keep in mind, back in 2012, we had a major project in Lab West that needed power, so that would have been an opportunity to supply that power. The economic benefits then at the time was really around the 5,000 jobs and people that are working at Muskrat right now. But having this squarely and clearly on the backs of ratepayers in our province was not something that I supported. Also, as part of this, it took, through legislation, some other opportunities that we could have for other sources of power. So I don't think back in 2012 that this was the only option. But nevertheless, I find myself in a situation now that we manage our way through this. Lots of people have asked me, why we did not consider just shutting down this project, simply because of the costs that have incurred would not go away. If this project was shut down, the cost and the people of this province would have still had to pay for Muskrat Falls.
But there's economists view things as a sunk cost. Right now, when we were talking back in 2012, we were looking at a $6 billion project. Now you're at, what, 11.5, 11.6, something like that?
Yeah, you're at between 11.7 and 11.8 when you factor in the interest on this project.
But the question I had was, 12 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion. At some points, economic, if you really approach things rationally, you should say, well, you know what? Better to write off 6 billion now than 15 billion in 10 years.
I understand your comment, but the cost of those would not go away, and we still had to find reliable power for the people, primarily on the Northeast Avalon in this particular case. So the need for power, reliable power, didn't go away, would not go away. Neither would the sunken costs that you just mentioned, Anthony. They were not going away either.
Yeah.
So when we looked at this, the only option that we had, and keep in mind there were contracts in place. To supply power through a partner in America. So there was all kinds of complex situation for the province, and we're going to finish this. And my job now is to manage our way through it.
Let me come back to what you mentioned there, sort of shifting a little bit about ratepayers. The rates when this project is finished, when is first power now expected? 2 years?
Yeah, it should be.
Should be. Yeah. Maybe, you think that it might be delayed?
Well, no, I'm not anticipating any more delays. And the key thing, one of the things that really doesn't get talked much about publicly is that right now is that there's been a big focus, and one of the things that the CEO, Stan Marshall, did, which I agreed with and was something that I'd been considering myself, was that actually separating this project into really two projects, one being transmission, which would allow the province to get power in even prior to the generating station at Muskrat Falls being completed. So getting reliable power in place so we would not have to go to a dark NL that we've seen back in 2014. So
3 years ago yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. But nevertheless, that was not something that we wanted to see happen again. And of course, there's been significant money that has been invested into hydro, making sure that the assets are in shape. But nevertheless, it is now really two projects, transmission and generation.
Okay. The right question I had for you is, and this is not necessarily on you, but it will be your problem or could be your problem, depending on when power comes on. Have you given significant thought, either as Dwight Ball, the regular citizen, and Dwight Ball, the premier, to what it's going to mean when everybody's power rates double or almost double?
Well, what we're seeing every year, we see an increase in power rates primarily within in all jurisdictions.
But it's going to happen fast.
Right? The thing is we've already put in some mitigating efforts, and we'll continue to find and see what options we have available to us. We also know that that when you look at sanctioning in 2012, where they thought the demand would be once power was available, is not the case. So this is a situation that we spent a lot of time at what options will we have available, and actually changing the system and adjusting the system so that we can sell power, but sell continuous power or firm power to other jurisdictions. So it is not lost on me where we are, but
right.
we spend a lot of time.
Well, I hope someday we will be able to talk about selling power through Quebec or to New England, whatever, but I think we're pretty far from that. My question, though, is have you thought about what it's going to mean? You think about seniors, working poor. I mean, you and I can probably afford a big increase in electricity, you better than me, but the middle class, I think they're a little fed up with tax increases, to be blunt. The reaction to doubling power rates is going to be fierce. I mean, if you think that Dark NL was one thing, it's going to be a major political storm. How do you sell that? How do you sell, hey, we're going to be doubling your power rates?
You can't sell that. You know, what you have to do is make sure that you spend the next 2 or 3 years that we have available to us to make sure that we put in mitigating efforts, because not only we have the individuals that pay for this, the business community, the impact on business within Newfoundland and Labrador. Inflation, all those issues are major issues, and it will be attached and tied to Muskrat Falls to some degree. But keep in mind, Muskrat will be less than around 400 to 500 megawatts of power in a system that will be blended in when you think of Beta Spear, Cat Arm, Hines Lake, and all the others that we have available to us. So for us right now is find ways that we actually make sure that we extrapolate to every extent we can possible the cheap power at areas like Beta Spear and so on. And other, let's keep in mind, Anthony, that we're in a world now, both federally and I guess globally, where people are looking for green energy to support the foundation blocks of power that you use to back up wind and so on. So fortunately, there will be some federal initiatives that will be looking for reliable green power as well. And we want to make sure that we tap into those options as well.
I want to talk about the financial situation, but quickly, this sinkhole situation. Eddie Joyce, obviously busy guy, is the acting transportation minister. Are you content with how the whole thing unfolded? Because from a communications point of view, when the pictures came out yesterday, I think a lot of people said, oh, okay, this is a big, big deal. Why didn't the department put that stuff up earlier instead of putting up with 3 days of anger?
Well, yesterday, of course, there was some new revelation that some extra work that needed to be done there. So we were not going to move away from that situation when we were mobilized and had people there and ready to respond to a situation that we knew could be potentially, have serious impact on traffic and maybe create some accidents in that area. But I also want to respond, Anthony, to some of the questions about how the department actually responded on day one, which was on New Year's Eve. And keep in mind that we had transportation works. They were there immediately. But you had to find culverts. These are big culverts that we're replacing with that current sinkhole situation there. So there was a lot of work required. And, we're very proud that they were there on Monday morning ready to do this. There was some criticism about what happened in Terra Nova based on the fall replacement of the culvert. Well, the fact is the culvert that went into Terra Nova came from the province. So it was actually the province that stepped up and helped the feds in that work in Terra Nova. So there's a lot of miscommunication.
It was also summerish, right? It was
and plus you had contractors there just literally a few feet away doing road work. So they responded as quickly as possible.
So you think this Saturday to Saturday is reasonable?
Well, we're pushing now, of course, getting that open because we realize the inconvenience it is causing for the traveling public right now. But we want to make sure that we keep those highways safe. And this is really symptomatic of what we're seeing with much of the aging infrastructure and a reason why we're investing quite heavily in our highways and roads within our province.
Okay, in preparation for this interview, I reread the Way Forward document because I figure that's what you're treating.
That's good. We encourage people to read it.
Yes, it's online if you want to check it out. Beautiful pictures, about 50 pages. Now, the one thing about the document that I think everybody gives you credit for is you recognize that the province doesn't have a revenue problem. It has, quote, a spending problem, right? And the Way Forward also says that you're going to reduce the deficit to get to surplus again by 22-23, right? Now, my math tells me that if you're going to do that, you have to cut spending by about $275 million a year for the next 5 years to actually get there, not to mention win an election between 2022. The way forward has notions, but no specifics. When are we going to see how you're going to execute that plan of getting back to surplus if, as I say, according to my math, you've got to cut $275 million? I don't think you want to raise taxes anymore.
No, I think that as you mentioned there, it's really a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Newfoundland and Labrador has led the country 9 out of 10 years in revenue per capita in Canada right now. So as a province, so you can see that really the issue that we have to deal with is a spending problem. So we've done quite a bit of that already in terms of the management, in terms of our deputy ministers, our ADMs, our communications. So we've taken the leadership, and really right now we're into a negotiation.
But these are drops in the bucket.
They are drops in the bucket.
But $275 million for 5 years. I mean, the solution to a spending problem is to not just stop spending, but to reduce spending.
But
right?
But Anthony, you had to start at the management first, and which is what we did. The leadership that we put in place. There's no point in saying that you're going to cut spending every other area if you're not willing to start within your own offices yourself. And we've been able to do that. So right now we're into a negotiation. I think this is a situation where every single person within the province realizes that this is just not the problem of a premier or a problem of a government. We will provide the management skills that we have to make sure we get those costs down. But this will require every single person in this province. And when I listen to McCurdy and Davis still talking about a 5-year plan that would suggest oil would have to be this year at $80 a barrel. Well, that is no plan when you base it on commodity prices. I've heard nothing from Earl McCurdy. So we are really into a negotiating process with our unions right now. And we're looking forward to actually this discussion because they have made commitments that they have that they see some opportunities to help us with this situation as well. But we know that we have to create efficient, cost-effective services to people in our province, and people have no tolerance for waste.
I can't argue with you there, but is this the sort of year where we could actually see you go on provincial-wide television to explain directly to Newfoundlanders, as Clyde Wells did, the extent of how... I'm not sure if people understand there's a problem, but I'm not sure people understand the extent of this hole. I mean, talk about sinkholes. The deficit and the financial situation is a huge economic and political sinkhole.
It's unprecedented, Anthony. And when I talk to other Canadian premiers, there's no other province in the situation that we were into. And when you talk to people that were premiers, you mentioned Premier Wells and others, that they have never been in this situation. And some of them have said that publicly, by the way. So if it takes going on province-wide TV, sure, I'm prepared to do that. Just like I am to sit in your show this morning and have this discussion with you. Because, when you talk about billions of dollars, it is very difficult for people and for anyone to really understand what that means to the householder. But when you look at a per capita debt, not dealing with this, it's around $54,000 for every man, woman, and child in our province.
It's an astounding figure.
It is an astounding
So when
figure.
will we get specifics about how you and Kathy Bennett are going to fix this spending problem that you admit we have?
Well, we're fixing it. As I said, there's been a number of steps that's been taken already from the management side. We spend $3.8 billion a year in salaries and benefits within our province. So it's a significant piece of what we do. It's about 45% of our budget. So we're into a negotiation right now, and we will have a fair negotiating process. And coming out of this, we will see, where we are and what our spending situation will be at that time.
All right, last question, getting back to big possible events. If I were a betting man, which I am, what are the chances of a deal with Quebec on energy?
People talk a lot more about about a deal with Quebec on energy, but the key to any of this is I'm willing and prepared to sit down with the table with any province. Matter of fact, I spend more time talking to my Atlantic province colleagues about energy than I do. Matter of fact, I have not had any discussions with Quebec, but I'm certainly prepared to do that. If there's a deal to be had, why would I not do that?
You haven't spoken to Mr. Couillard at all?
Mr. Couillard, I spoke to him in December at the climate change conference. He spent some time there, although he was quite busy in his own assembly at that time. But we're willing to sit down and talk about initiatives on many fronts. They're the only province that we actually share a land border with. So if at any point there is a discussion on hydroelectricity or any source of energy or any benefit at all between the province and Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm not adverse It's not something that I would not go to simply because of our history. But I do say I spend more time talking with our Atlantic Canadian provinces than I do with Quebec right now. But we're looking for good deals, and when they're available and we can find them, we're certainly will entertain that conversation.
All right. I'll put that question to Stan Marshall. Premier, appreciate you coming in for an extensive interview this morning, and look forward to talking to you again in 2017.
Well, thank you, and Happy New Year to all your listeners.